What if I told you that the fate of the 20th century, millions of lives, 2 world wars, a global ideological divide, hinged on something as mundane as a missed train connection? That one of history's most ruthless leaders, Joseph Stalin, narrowly escaped political erasure not through cunning or strength, but because someone else was late to the station. Everyone knows Stalin as the man of steel, the architect of Soviet totalitarianism. But few realize just how close he came to being sidelined forever in the early 1920s, at a moment when Lenin's health was failing and the future of the revolution hung in the balance. In 1922, Stalin's political fortunes were anything but secure. He was not yet the iron-fisted ruler we remember. He was a mid-tier party man, one among several ambitious Bolsheviks circling the center of power. Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, all more famous, more eloquent, more favored by Lenin himself. And yet, somehow, Stalin emerged on top. Why? Textbooks will tell you about backroom alliances, clever maneuvering, even Lenin's testament, in which the ailing leader warned against Stalin's rise. But what they don't tell you is this: Stalin's path to power may have depended on a scheduling error, a delay, a man who didn't arrive in time. Because in early 1922, a secret meeting was meant to take place between key members of the Politburo, one that could have ended Stalin's rise before it even began. The pieces were in motion. A majority of senior Bolsheviks had grown uneasy with Stalin's behavior. His methods were aggressive, his tone increasingly authoritarian. Lenin had already begun to turn against him. There was talk, serious talk, of removing him from the post of general secretary, and yet, nothing happened. The meeting never took place as planned. Why? Because one man, Sergo Ordzhonikidze, a crucial vote in the anti-Stalin coalition, missed his connection en route to Moscow. The reason? A sudden change in the train schedule. A temporary rerouting on the Transcaucasian Railway. A minor hiccup in Soviet logistics, but it was enough. Enough to postpone the meeting, enough to give Stalin time to regroup, enough to shift the timing of fate. And the rest, as they say, was history, but not the one that was supposed to happen. To understand how fragile Stalin's rise really was, we need to rewind and examine the storm quietly brewing beneath the surface of Soviet politics in 1922. On paper, Joseph Stalin had just achieved a major victory. He was appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party, but in practice, that title didn't carry the weight it would come to have later. Back then, it was seen as a bureaucratic role, important, yes, but administrative, safe, harmless. Or so they thought. What made Stalin dangerous wasn't the title itself. It was what he did with it. He began methodically building a personal power network, placing loyalists in key positions, gathering leverage over personnel decisions, and quietly shifting the center of gravity inside the party. And some of his comrades began to notice. One of them was Lenin himself. Despite their early alliance, Lenin grew alarmed by Stalin's tactics. His growing arrogance, his harsh treatment of fellow revolutionaries, and his increasing disregard for party norms. It all came to a head in December 1922, when Lenin dictated a series of personal notes, what would later be called Lenin's Testament. In them, he explicitly warned the party about Stalin's consolidation of power and suggested that he be removed from the general secretary post. But here's the twist. Those notes weren't made public right away. They were intended for the party congress the following year. But in the meantime, action had to be taken by the inner circle. And that's where the meeting comes in. A small informal gathering of senior Bolsheviks was arranged to discuss Lenin's concerns, and specifically whether Stalin could still be trusted in the role he now occupied. The group included figures like Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, and crucially, Sergo Ordzhonikidze. Sergo wasn't just any party official. He was a longtime revolutionary, a close friend of Stalin from their days in the Caucasus, and someone whose presence would carry enormous weight, either to defend Stalin or to lend credibility to a move against him. But Sergo was late. He had been traveling from Tiflis, modern-day Tbilisi, on a route that required several train transfers through the volatile infrastructure of post-revolutionary Russia. Somewhere along the journey, a routine maintenance delay rerouted his train. A missed connection. A night stuck in a provincial station. Nothing dramatic. Just another day in Soviet transport logistics. But his absence changed everything. Without Sergo, the votes in the room weren't solid. There was hesitancy. No one wanted to ignite a confrontation without full consensus. So the group agreed, quietly and fatally, to postpone the discussion. Just a few days, nothing more. But in politics, days can be a lifetime. And for Stalin, they were exactly what he needed. Stalin didn't waste those days. While his rivals hesitated, he moved. Quietly, surgically. He shored up his base inside the party apparatus, placing more loyal administrators into regional offices, replacing unreliable secretaries, and expanding his influence in exactly the place most of his peers ignored, the bureaucracy. It was a strategy built on patience and paperwork, not speeches and headlines. And it worked. By the time Sergo finally arrived in Moscow and the inner circle reconvened, the momentum had shifted. The urgency was gone. Lenin's condition had worsened. The window of political clarity was closing. And Stalin, always watching, always calculating, had learned something critical. The timing of his enemies wasn't as reliable as the trains they relied on. Still, the danger wasn't over. In the months that followed, Lenin tried again to raise the alarm. He dictated a scathing addendum to his original testament, highlighting Stalin's personal insults toward his wife and calling him too rude to hold power. But Lenin was no longer the Lenin of October 1917. He was incapacitated, partially paralyzed, barely able to speak, and Stalin controlled access to his office, his papers, even his doctors. The general secretary, once thought to be a low-level functionary, was now gatekeeper to the revolution's most sacred voice. Then came the 12th Party Congress. It was supposed to be the moment Lenin's warnings would be read aloud, the moment the delegates would hear his plea to remove Stalin. But Zinoviev and Kamenev, both political survivors, both eyeing their own futures, chose not to read the testament. They feared it would cause a rupture in the party, make them look divided before the rank and file. So instead, they buried it quietly, politically, fatally. And Stalin, who should have been fighting for survival, instead tightened his grip. He knew his enemies were fractured. He knew the party hated indecision more than ambition. And he knew something else, something that would become his trademark for decades to come. History doesn't remember who was supposed to win. It remembers who stayed standing. But behind that rise, behind the myth of inevitability, there was still the train, still the delay, still that one missed connection that denied his rivals a quorum, that bought him time, that threw the rhythm of the entire sequence off by just enough to shift everything, enough to keep him in the game. And that's when the real dominoes began to fall. What happened next wasn't just Stalin's consolidation of power, it was the transformation of the Soviet Union itself. One by one, his rivals were neutralized. Trotsky was exiled, then assassinated. Zinoviev and Kamenev, once his allies in burying Lenin's testament, were later branded traitors and executed. Bukharin, the party's brilliant theorist, was publicly humiliated and shot after a show trial. And Sergo? Even he, Stalin's old friend, the man who missed the train, wouldn't survive. In 1937, Sergo Ordzhonikidze died suddenly after a heated argument with Stalin. Officially, it was suicide. Unofficially, it was Stalin's way of cleaning up loose ends, but let's zoom out. The missed train wasn't just a lucky break. It was a butterfly effect. A seemingly minor disruption that shifted the political timing just enough to allow a dangerous momentum to build. That delay gave Stalin the hours, then days, then months he needed to turn an administrative role into the engine of a dictatorship. Without that delay, the meeting might have happened. The warning might have been acted on. The party might have removed him. And then what? Imagine a Soviet Union without Stalin. No purges, no gulags, no forced famines in Ukraine, no Great Terror, no signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Would World War II have begun differently? Would the post-war world have been divided into two nuclear-armed superpowers? Would the Cold War have even existed? These are counterfactuals, yes, but they're grounded in something real, something disturbingly small. A train schedule, an unsent telegram, a late arrival. And in the vortex of power struggles, timing isn't just a technicality, it's everything. In politics, showing up too late can be as decisive as not showing up at all, because history doesn't hand out second chances. It moves on. It rewards presence. And in Stalin's case, it punished absence, just not his. History loves grand narratives, revolutions, manifestos, iron wills. But behind the curtain of every sweeping transformation are moments that feel almost absurd in their simplicity. A train delay, a calendar misalignment, a man stuck overnight in a provincial station. Sergo Ordzhonikidze didn't know, couldn't have known that his missed connection might alter the trajectory of the 20th century. That his absence from a meeting room in Moscow would buy Stalin just enough time to survive, consolidate, and then dominate. That the choice he never made would ripple outward into gulags, famines, and a divided world, locked in nuclear tension. This is where the eureka moment hits, not in the epic, but in the ordinary. The realization that history isn't only forged by speeches and wars, it's shaped by timing, access, absence. Stalin didn't out-argue his rivals, he outlasted them, first by inches, then by years. And it all started not with a strategy, but with a schedule. So next time we marvel at how certain figures seemed destined for power, remember this: sometimes destiny rides the rails and it arrives 5 minutes late. If this story made you rethink the fragile scaffolding behind world-changing events, then don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who sees history as black and white, and subscribe to the Domino Effect, the channel that uncovers the missed meetings, misplaced papers, and misfired moments that rewired the world. Because history doesn't run on certainty, it runs on timing.